Hi friends, Leanne Vogel here from healthfulpursuit.com. I am a holistic nutritionist and best-selling author of the Keto Diet, the Keto Diet Cookbook, and Keto for Women, and you are watching the Keto Diet Podcast. It's episode 291. I'm joined today by Chris Irvin. I'm going to be introducing him in a moment, but first I want to tell you what we're chatting about. Carb tolerance. It's a really big deal. So many of us struggle with carb intolerance. So we're going to be talking about the various stages that we go through on our ketogenic diet, why a ketogenic diet is so healing for our ability to process carbohydrates, how the role of insulin either helps us lose weight or makes it quite impossible even when we're on the ketogenic diet. We're talking about bioindividuality. We're touching a little bit on CGMs, continuous glucose monitors. We did an episode 279. I'll include links up here and down below. And episode 292, we have the founder of Levels on to chat about CGM data. If you want to learn more, you can look down below for some CGM information if you want to delve deep into CGM. We also chat about the good news. You know, you're on the ketogenic diet. Here's what you can expect on your ketogenic diet, what to look for, how to adjust things properly, and really how to set up your ketogenic diet so that months from now, years from now, you can have a very different ketogenic protocol because you've healed your body. And so I'm really excited to introduce our guest today. His name is Chris Irvin, as I already said. He's a nutrition science researcher and writer with an expertise in ketogenic dieting. Chris holds a master's degree in exercise and nutrition science and spent his time in graduate school studying the ketogenic diet for performance and therapeutic applications. Chris is the compliance and education manager at Perfect Keto and strives to make the ketogenic diet easy and keto science accessible to everyone. He is also the author of the Keto Answers book. You can find him on Instagram at the Ketologist, also perfectketo.com, the Ketologist.com, and ketoanswersbook.com. I'll include all those links down below, so don't even worry about it. And before we get to the actual video interview of Chris and I having a lot of fun, you will quickly learn I love chatting with my hands. I get very excited. I want to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Bel Campo. They make grass-fed, grass-finished beef, heritage-raised pork, pasture-raised chicken, all of the things born and raised in the USA. You can find details down below, including a savings code there. And Paleo Valley. Now, I've been eating their meat sticks since before they were available to the public. These things are tasty, they're fermented, they're good, and their vitamin C complex is legit the best vitamin C I've ever had. So I will include links down below with a savings code there. And as always, if you want to reach out to me, you have questions, look for the link down below. Also, because we're chatting about carbs and supporting your body through carbs, I put together a free bazillion page document for you. You can find it by going to healthfulpursuit.com/carbup. I'll include a link up here. So if you're trying to incorporate carbs on your ketogenic diet and you're in that later stage of your ketogenic diet where you're able to incorporate carbs, not for the newbie ketoers, but definitely for the veteran ketoers, and you're trying to include some carbohydrates and you've gotten to that place, I've put together over 50 carb up recipes specifically for your ketogenic diet with varying levels of carbohydrates. So again, that's healthfulpursuit.com/carbup, and I will include a link up here. So enough of me chatting. Let's get to this interview. I'll see you over there. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
I'm great, Leanne. How are you today?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course. I'm super excited to be on here. This is honestly, like, no joke, one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. And so, like, to actually get to finally come on and chat is pretty exciting for me.
Wow, you're blowing my mind right now because you're just so great. It's amazing that you feel like my show is one of the best shows.
Well, it has to, I would have to say, is this the longest running keto podcast?
I don't even know, my friend. I don't even know. I'm so bad at stats and things. Like, people ask me, like, how many down? I'm like, I don't know. It's just awesome. Like,
I feel like when I first got into keto back in like 2015, 2016. Yours was like one of the first, it was like you and Jimmy Moore, which
Yeah.
wasn't specifically keto, but it was low carb, were like two of the first podcasts that were out there. And then yours was obviously like very keto specific. And I think it might be one of the longest running ones. We need to look that up, I guess.
Well, you heard it here first, not from my mouth. That's too great. I love it. And you came on the show a while back, but I didn't interview you. So this is like the first time we're actually like being able to have a conversation.
Oh yeah, we did that little Q&A episode with Dr. Gustin, right?
Yeah. Oh, listeners really loved that one. I'll have to include it in the show notes. It was so good. And I really loved, just giving the show to guests, but I also really love having conversations.
Yeah.
Actual people.
Right, you get a little bit of both, get the good conversation too.
Exactly. So today we're going to be talking about carb tolerance, which, back in 2014, when I started the ketogenic diet, I learned very quickly that women specifically, especially my body, I could not eat low carb forever and ever and ever. It just wasn't possible. I dealt with a lot of issues, a lot to do with my hormones. And so I wanted to have you on to kind of chat about what your experience has been with carb tolerance. And so I'd love for us to just define, when we say carb tolerance, what are we saying and kind of what are we talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. So carb tolerance is, like, the way I like to look at it is that your body's ability to actually use carbohydrates. So, we know that carbohydrates are an energy source. We know that, a healthy body should be able to take in those carbohydrates and use them to produce energy, use that energy to carry out the various functions of the body. But we also know that, we live in a society now where there's a very high percentage of us who are carb intolerant or who are not very well able to use the carbohydrates that they eat. And we can get into that in this episode about, the statistics of that and why that happens and what that means. But it's a really important thing, because when we consider how our bodies, if we're not metabolizing carbohydrates very well, or we have poor carb tolerance, but we're consuming a lot of them, that can come with a lot of health impairments, and that can cause a lot of the common chronic diseases that we see today are caused by carb intolerance and the continuous consumption of them when you don't have good tolerance to it. So, in the simplest terms, carb tolerance is just your body's ability to actually use the carbs that it's eating.
And we're really talking about metabolic health here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, this, like, carb tolerance can kind of go hand in hand. It's essentially the same thing as insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance that you hear people talk about so much. It's just kind of the simplified. When you say insulin sensitivity, people are like, what is this guy talking about? But when you say carb tolerance, people can kind of resonate with that a little bit better. So essentially what it is this is metabolic health. It's our metabolism. It's, all of us have a different metabolism that, depending on our lifestyle and our diet and how long we've been consuming the diet that we're eating now, it affects our metabolism and how we metabolize different nutrients. So, to get into why it's obviously important is because insulin resistance, which would be the same thing as carb intolerance or an inability to use carbs, is a precursor to diabetes, which we know is a huge problem. We know that it's like a third of our population in the US is pre-diabetic. Something like 50% or the projections are for over 50% will be diabetic by, I don't know if it was 2030 or something like that is what they're saying. So it's obviously a huge problem when we look at diabetes, but not even just diabetes. Most of the chronic health conditions that we see today, things like even Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases, obesity, cancer, metabolic syndrome, all of those things are caused by carb intolerance or insulin resistance. And to kind of explain a little bit of what that means on a basic level, when we consume carbohydrates, those carbohydrates get broken down into glucose. Glucose rises in our bloodstream. Our pancreas secretes insulin. Insulin goes and talks to our cells, the trillions of cells in our bodies, and says, hey, open up the doors, let glucose in so glucose can be used as energy. This is a good process. And somebody whose body is doing this adequately or healthily is somebody who we would consider to be insulin sensitive or carb tolerant. They're able to handle carbohydrates. Their cells respond to insulin. It's a great thing. Now, when this process gets chronically overstimulated, which would happen from over-consuming carbohydrates for a long period of time, that communication between insulin and our cells becomes damaged. And those cells don't quite get that message from insulin anymore. so they're not opening up and letting the carbs be taken into the cell to be used for energy. And this creates this cycle where, that means that our blood glucose stays elevated after we have the carbs, which means that our pancreas has to keep secreting insulin. And this can become a problem when it's taking place over the course of our lifetime frequently, right? So and again, that would be, that the latter part of that would be carb intolerance or insulin resistance. It means that like your body's taking the carbs in, blood glucose is becoming elevated, but you're just not using them effectively. Your body just has, for whatever reason, and we can talk about, it's not just carb consumption that causes this. There's actually other things that can cause this as well. But the primary cause is going to be probably the overconsumption of carbohydrates, which diminishes your ability to do it and thus makes you carb intolerant.
And I'm hearing a lot of threads of bioindividuality in here. There's so much, and that's what I really dislike. You go on the internet, I have one app on my phone for doing plank workouts, and after it always shows me new keto programs that I really, really need. And it's like step 1, 2, 3, and you're going to lose 20 pounds. We guarantee it in a week. And I'm like, liars.
Yes, so true.
Yeah.
And it looks like, it's one of those things where if you look at our population and you consider what percentage of our population is insulin resistant pre-diabetic, like a standard keto approach is going to probably check most of the boxes that those people need at first. So that's why you see like the standard general recommendation for keto, which is essentially, we're removing the carbohydrates, which in the case of people who are carb intolerant are causing most of their problems. Simply doing that alone is a great way to get people kickstarted and going in the right direction, right? But as you start to that we're talking about, you're on the standard American diet, anything else is going to be better. And especially keto, which is already a pretty great diet, is going to produce a lot of improvements. But we know that as you continue to follow it, that the bioindividuality that you're talking about starts to come out a little bit more. And we have to look at it a little bit more. We have to make adjustments to our diet, adjustments to, even not just nutrition, other lifestyle components, because it does become different. And you talk about like the gender differences as well. That's also something that we see. It's like we can't make the same recommendations for male and female, and we can't make the same recommendations for different goals, right? It's all dependent on so many things. So, I think that that general cookie cutter approach, probably not bad for the person coming from the standard American diet, but for anybody who's trying to take it that like little extra level, or trying to really dial it in and get specific with their nutrition, it takes a little bit more than those cookie cutter approaches.
Yes, completely. And what I'm hearing from you also is insulin, like oftentimes, they'll start the ketogenic protocol and then we'll get impatient because it's not working, but there's that silent little guy in the background called insulin. And when insulin is out partying in your body, ... is weight loss happening? Are we burning fat?
Right.
No.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people don't think about the power of insulin and understanding, it took you, let's say 40 years to get to this place. And now you're on your ketogenic diet, you're eating really well, you're feeling better, but there's quite a little bit of damage in the background, and nothing you can't fix. I really truly believe that a whole food based approach is going to heal your body over time. But I think a lot of people get that impatience, like you said, with that bioindividuality as it starts sliding in. There are issues that pop up.
Right. Yeah. And you make a really good point too, talking about like is your body burning fat when insulin's elevated? And that's kind of the whole thing, right? So when we look at it, all kind of starts to make sense when you piece the puzzles together that, okay, we have a great amount of our population is insulin resistant. And what that means is that they have a lot of insulin in their body. It means that like when they consume carbs, where for somebody who's, carb tolerant, they may see an increase in insulin when they have carbs and then it goes back down. These people are having their insulin elevated all day. And like you said, when insulin is elevated, insulin directly blunts fat burning. So when insulin is up, you're not burning fat. So if people have elevated insulin levels all day, they're not burning fat, which makes sense why we have this obesity pandemic that we have in our country and really in our world. But when we start a ketogenic diet or we start a low carb diet or whatever, like you said, it does take time to bring that stuff down. There's damage that has occurred in your body. And really the point, and this is where I think a keto diet specifically, like getting really strict and staying super low carb, like lower than 30 grams, I feel like it's so restorative for people who are in these positions, because you're repairing your metabolism. You're completely removing the problem. Well, one of the problems, the other problem is probably veggie oils, which we can talk about a little bit, but you're removing one of the big problems, and you can start to heal when you do that. But like you said, it takes time, right? And I think a lot of times keto dieters or people who go low carb, they get impatient because they see that rapid weight loss at the start, and they're like, hey, this is great. I lost 7 pounds the first week. I must be doing something right. And then, you start realizing that, okay, well, a lot of it was actually water weight. You still have, a bit of restoration to occur still in your body before you're going to really get that metabolism back where it needs to be. So I think that you're right. We're a country where we like quick fixes. We get marketed all the time that like a 30-day diet is going to solve all of our problems and help us lose all of our weight. And it's a lot more than that. And that's why I like the keto approach that talks more about, we're using this diet to restore your metabolism. This isn't supposed to be a quick fix. This is, let's get you back to baseline, because, the baseline human should be able to consume carbohydrates. We should be able to have some in the right amounts. We should be able to use, like our body should be able to take them in, use them, transition back and forth between different fuel sources like fat, ketones, and carbs. But the truth is that most of us can't, because of what the standard American diet is. So we have to take, some people think of keto as an extreme diet. I don't think that it's an extreme diet, but it's definitely more on the extreme end than somebody who's like not counting macros and just eating whole food, right? And I think that like that extremeness of being like very granular and checking, every box and making sure that your carbs are below 30, that's going to be really important for those people who are in that state of like, hyperinsulinemia and that insulin level always being elevated for them.
Yes, beautifully said. And how do we know that our insulin is high? Like, I know somebody's asking like, but like I do all right. And I check my glucose once in a while. I think I'm all right. Like, how do we know that it's high or that there's an issue?
Yeah. So, I think that there's a couple different ways for people who are maybe not as big into, testing and biohacking and gathering data and stuff like that. You can really do it a little bit based off of feel. So, if you consume carbohydrates and you feel groggy, tired, and bloated after you have them, it's probably a sign that there's some insulin resistance in your body, because, and of course the carb type matters. So obviously, regardless of your metabolic health, if you eat a donut, you're probably not going to feel great afterwards. But if you're eating like a sweet potato or, certain fruits and things like that, if that's putting you into like a carb coma or making you have like a lot of digestive issues, then you probably have some insulin resistance going on. So I think that some people can do this just based off of feel. And then for the people who want to go a little bit more in depth, there's a lot of testing that you can do. So personal testing, like you said, testing blood glucose, that's not going to give you a direct look at your insulin levels, but it is going to give you a good idea. If you have elevated fasting blood glucose in the morning, that's probably a sign that you also have some hyperinsulinemia or high insulin levels as well. When it comes to checking blood sugar, you can obviously do that with different like finger prick devices. I'm actually wearing one of the Levels CGM devices, so I can scan like on my phone and get my reading in real time, which is really cool for looking at like responses to certain foods. Does my body respond well to this carb source? Does it not? Is my diet dialed in? Is it not? So, you can definitely get into what I call like biohacking and just like the more technology data collection side of this. And then you can also go to your doctor, right? So you can get actual insulin blood tests done. You can get like your HbA1c done. And you don't have to go to a doctor for that. You can also just go to like anywhere where you can get blood work done and look specifically for those tests. So I think that all of those are good. And really the answer, I think, for somebody is probably a combination of those things. I think that we should all keep pulse of how we feel. We should always be looking at like, how do our brains feel? How does our energy levels feel? How is our sleep, our recovery from exercise, everything in response to the foods we're eating. So I think that we should do that. I think that like the data tracking like this that I'm using, doing that every once in a while and checking in, like I'm doing it for the next 4 weeks, it's something that I do, maybe once or twice a year just to make sure that everything's dialed in. I also like to run some different experiments on myself during this time when I have it. So check in with that. And then similar to the blood work too, get that done every once in a while as just a way to check in and get a pulse on what's going on. So I think really a combination is the best. But it doesn't have to be as complicated as what everybody says. You really can go off of feel and listen to your body and get a lot of information that way.
I love that you provided a bunch of different ways, because some people, like, I love levels.
Yeah.
I'm going to apply my next one in January and I can't wait. I did it, I believe, in September, October. And wow, did I learn so much about my body in a 4-week period. Like,
Yeah.
it's amazing how much you learn. What are some of like the big takeaways that you were like blown away with as you started playing with the levels CGM situation?
Yeah, for sure. And this is where bioindividuality comes in the most, because I've seen crazy stuff with myself. The Perfect Keto team, we've had like, all of us have worn these devices. We love them. So we've like compared to each other and we've seen some crazy things. But few things that I've noticed is that, different carb sources definitely impact me differently. So sweet potatoes don't bother my blood sugar very much. I don't get a big spike from them. I get a small spike from them, but it goes up and then it goes back down pretty quickly after I eat. So that was a good thing to figure out. It's like, I actually like sweet potatoes. So I can, eat those occasionally now and throw those in without, worrying about them spiking my blood sugar too much. Cassava was actually something that I found in me personally that my body does not do well with. I get a big spike in blood sugar when I have like cassava flour or cassava chips, which are becoming a popular ingredient in the low carb space. So those were two like diet specific things that I found. And it's interesting because comparing to like other people at Perfect Keto, one of my friends, he would have a sweet potato and his blood sugar would go through the roof. And cassava and like cassava chips and things like that, no problem for him. So really big difference. And we're talking about two guys very similar in age, very similar in level of fitness. Like, from the outside looking in, it would look like we should probably be about the same, but drastic differences in how our body's metabolizing things, which was really cool. And then I also kind of, got a chance to study the dawn effect a little bit with the continuous blood glucose monitor. So seeing that spike in blood sugar in the morning, which I think it's good for people to see that, because, when you're just getting a snapshot and you're like testing your finger once in the morning, you may think that you're worse off than what you really are. But when you can test it right when you wake up and then test it a couple hours later and see that like, that's just that dawn effect that's causing that spike in blood sugar in the morning, it gives you a better understanding of where you're actually at with your metabolic health. And then caffeine was another thing that I found. Caffeine, really, coffee specifically, but that's really my only source of caffeine. That spikes my blood sugar quite a bit too. So I try to be mindful of that, which was good to see, because when you're not seeing that stuff and you're like, oh, coffee, no problem, I can have it as much as I want. Now I'm like, well, I should probably pay attention to it a little bit. So what did you find? Did you find anything interesting?
Oh my gosh. Well, sweet potatoes spike me hardcore.
Really?
Like, I did a test between a sweet potato, white potato, and I mean, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. So I like
Yeah.
tried to test it a bunch of ways. White potato, fine,
Really?
fine, totally fine.
Wow.
Beans, fine. Sweet potato, horrible.
Mhm.
Cassava, also horrible. Like,
Really?
that stuff is like, it spiked me so bad.
Wow.
Stress, like even while working, I found when I had a deadline, my glucose started increasing, and I would just take a moment, step away from my desk and just breathe, and then it would start to go down.
Right.
I loved that part. Coffee also cannot do. And also I really loved it for sleep quality.
Mm.
So I had a lot of fun incorporating fasting or longer term fasts and seeing if I got up in the middle of the night, was it because my glucose was too low? Yes.
Yeah.
So then I started having like a bit of protein before bed, and I found like my sleep was so much better at certain times of my cycle, specifically like when my progesterone was high, my glucose started getting a little bit lower, and I had a hard time sleeping. So just to kind of correlate all these little pieces, and again, in our conversation, I hear bioindividuality, like
Yeah.
it's so cool. Yeah, it was such a blessing to be able to have that experience, and I can't wait to do it again.
Well, yeah, especially when you consider, like, just you telling your story about the potatoes there, that's completely counterintuitive to what we would assume with nutrition, right? Like, we look at glycemic
Yes.
index as something that, doctors use to prescribe patients things, especially diabetic patients. And, it would be things like have a sweet potato and not a white potato. But if you're not testing and you don't know, then you could be completely messing up your health or ruining the progress that you're trying to see because you don't have that bioindividuality. And so I really think it's important to get a sense of that thing, because like you said in your story, you now know these things, so you can make adjustments accordingly. Like, you know the feeling of what it is to be stressed out, so you don't have to be wearing your levels device to know that when you're stressed out, your blood sugar's through the roof. You just know that, hey, when I'm feeling this way, I should probably take some time. Which, the other cool thing about this is you can actually see how your strategies actually impact your health, and you don't get to see that when you're just doing things, right? Like, you might feel better, but like the levels device, I can actually see that, like, oh, and when I'm exercising more frequently, my fasting blood sugar is actually lower. So there, for me, is my kind of like affirmation that, hey, you should probably be exercising regularly. Or, when you see that, hey, my blood sugar goes down when I take time to meditate or decompress or whatever, that's affirmation that you should do that type of thing. So I think it's a really good way to give people that little extra, if you wanted to be pushed a little bit more, or you wanted to have that, that thing to hold you a little bit more accountable, getting some data is a really great way to do that.
Yes, completely, completely. And before, you mentioned increased glucose in the morning, perhaps being a sign of insulin resistance, but then there's the dawn effect. Are those two the same, different? Because we get a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, so definitely different. And when I say fasted morning blood sugar, that is going to be different from the blood sugar that you test right when you wake up in the morning. So when you first wake up in the morning, we see an increase in our blood sugar, and this is what we call the dawn effect. And the reason why this occurs is it plays a role with our circadian rhythms, or our wake-sleep cycles. So when we wake up in the morning, when our circadian rhythms are healthy, we have an increase in our cortisol levels in the morning, which the purpose of those is to suppress melatonin. So the opposite happens at night. When we go to bed at night, melatonin production increases, which suppresses cortisol, which allows us to go to sleep. In the morning, the opposite happens, where cortisol increases, melatonin goes down, you wake up. This is actually a good thing. This is cortisol working how it should. Cortisol gets that bad rap of being like the thing that causes disease. Chronic cortisol does, morning cortisol does not. But what happens is, when we see this increase in cortisol, that's typically followed by an increase in blood sugar. Our liver is putting out more blood sugar more sugar in the morning, causing our blood sugar to rise. So people who test their blood sugar immediately upon waking are going to see an elevation. But that doesn't mean, like mine this morning, I think it was like 110 or 115 when I woke up. But 2 hours later, it was down to like 78 or something like that. So it was kind of back down to the normal range where I'm typically at. So I always recommend for people, when you're testing your morning blood sugar, try to do it about an hour and a half to 2 hours after you wake up, because that would be a really good way to make sure that your kind of cortisol levels have evened out a little bit, pending what your morning looks like. If your morning's super stressful all the time, like you're in traffic and things are crazy, then that might be different. But typically 2 hours after will be a good time for that to come down a little bit. But I also think that it's really important to not have caffeine before you do that test, to not eat before, and to not do exercise, which for a lot of people, they're like, what the heck am I supposed to do in the morning then? Wait 2 hours, no coffee, no, like, what do I do? You don't have to do it every day. It's something you can do like once a week to check in and see, like one day a week, wake up in the morning, don't have coffee, don't work out, don't eat, test your blood sugar a couple hours after waking up, and then see where you're at. And then that's something you can track over time. Once a week, you can test that and you can check out that trend.
Beautiful. And so we chatted a little bit about carb intolerance and excess carbohydrates causing this intolerance, but you mentioned veggie oils, and I'd love to just kind of dive in, because I find a lot of my clients, and just, when I'm on book tour or something, I'll just say like, what are you eating on a daily basis? And they're like, da, 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 salad dressing, da, 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 fried something, keto something. And I'm like, veggie oil. Oh, there's some vegetable oil there too. So can we chat about the role of vegetable oils and how they might be detrimental to our ketogenic diet?
Yes, absolutely. So it's also one of the things that I ask the most. Like, I get a lot of people hit me up to troubleshoot their diet, see what's going on. I actually work with a lot of professional athletes too, like working with their nutritions, especially in the off season. And veggie oils is a big thing because of inflammation and recovery for the athlete. That they need to make sure they keep that in check. And it's crazy how much veggie oils people are consuming because it's in absolutely everything. Every standard dressing that has veggie oils in some form. And when we're talking about vegetable oils, we do have to clarify what we're talking about, because I know like avocado oil and olive oil, those are technically fruits, so they're actually not vegetable oil, but we put those in the vegetable oil category. What we're talking about specifically here is things like canola oil or rapeseed oil. We're talking about safflower oil, soybean oil, corn oil, and then some forms of sunflower oil also fall into this category. But these things are found in everything. They are in salad dressings. When you go to most restaurants, they're cooking in it. Even the quote healthy restaurants are using vegetable oils because people think that they're healthy. Baked goods are loaded in vegetable oils. It's a very common thing, right? So that kind of shows you why it's important, because it's in everything. But the reason why we want to avoid it is because vegetable oils are really high in omega-6. Omega-6 are fats that we need to have in our body, but when we have too much of them, or when we have a bad omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, we have higher levels of inflammation. So too much omega-6 fats is a great way to drive up our inflammation. Vegetable oils are loaded with omega-6 fats, but it's not just that they have a lot of omega-6 fats, it's the way that they're processed. So, when you think about like avocado oil or olive oil, those are actual, like avocados and olives are fatty. They actually have fat in them. So you can imagine extracting fat from an avocado because it's really high in fat. How much fat is in a soybean, right? Or how much fat is in like corn? It's like nothing, right? So you have to, it takes a lot. So like a cup of corn oil, I forget, it's like a ridiculous number of ears of corn that it takes. Do you know that number? You're nodding your head.
I don't. I'm like thinking it's something ridiculous, like 700, something ridiculous.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. And you're like, well, a human would never be able to consume that much corn or that much soy or anything like that. But we consume it so easily in our diets because of the way that these things are incorporated in them. So these foods, these different vegetable oils, they're high in omega-6, but to get them, because they're coming from sources that aren't rich in fat, they have to go through these super high heat extraction methods that basically pull the fat out of these sources, and it damages these omega-6s. So not only are these omega-6s, but they're damaged omega-6s, which are more toxic to our body. And Dr. Gustin, he has like my favorite phrase about it. He always talks about how they're like little firecrackers in our cells. Like when we have vegetable oils, they wreak havoc on not only our metabolic health, but also our digestive health. So they can increase inflammation in the gut. They can just completely destroy our gut microbiome, as well as just our digestive function. But then on the cellular level, they're also destroying our metabolism, and they can impair our ability to metabolize nutrients, and especially carbs. So we see that like people who have insulin sensitive or insulin resistance or carb intolerance, any of those things, they're typically, it's coming from that overconsumption of carbs, but likely coupled with that overconsumption of vegetable oils that's also further contributing to the damage that they're seeing at the metabolic level. So it's really one of the most important things for people to cut out. A couple of years ago, if you would have asked me, I would have said that sugar, number one thing people should cut out. Yes, sugar is bad, but I think that vegetable oil is like public enemy number one. It's a thing that we should get away from as fast as we can. If not from health perspective, from an environmental perspective, these seed oils, when they're coming from industrial agricultural practices that are not great for our environment. That's very damaging to our environment. So if you don't want to do it for your health, cutting it out for the sake of the environment would be greatly appreciated. I think our earth would appreciate that. But yeah, so they're this thing that they're in everything. They wreak havoc. And it's one of the primary reasons why we don't see the same progress for people on a ketogenic diet. You can be following a ketogenic diet where you're eating grass-fed meat cooked in butter or ghee or olive oil, and I can be eating a ketogenic diet where I'm going to McDonald's and having bunless burgers every day. And those are, that's going to be two very different diets, even though macronutrient-wise it may look the same, and even the food type it may look the same, but the way that those foods are prepared are drastically different. And those vegetable oils, having high amounts of those, is just something that we really need to cut out. And for anybody who's on a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet or a healthy diet, and whether they're stuck at a plateau or they're not seeing the progress they were seeing before, or they just want to take their health to the next level, look at veggie oils, pay attention to how much you're getting in your diet, and try to cut them out. And I promise you'll see a lot of benefits from doing that.
Yes, and I had to Google it while you were talking because I was like, is it 700? It's 780 pounds of corn. So 2.5 gallons of oil requires 56 pounds of, what does it say? 14 bushels of corn, and
Wow.
each bushel is 56 pounds. And so 2.5 gallons of corn oil requires 280 pounds of corn.
Wow.
780 rather, 780 pounds of corn. I mean, 200, 700, 780. That's
Right.
insane.
It is insane. And then when you look at that number, you can understand it's like humans we've never been exposed to that pre-vegetable oils. Like even when, we were eating like more corn or soy or any of that stuff, we were eating the whole plant. We were never able to get that much. Now, I mean, you can get like, I don't know what the number is. We'd have to do the math, but like to break that down to like a teaspoon, like that's still a ton of corn that
Too
you're
much.
getting. Too much. Yeah. Way more than your body or your genetics or your your epigenetics, any of that stuff. It can't handle that. It's way more than we've ever been exposed to before. And it's becoming a problem. And I think that, we know why it happened. There's some really good books out there that if you want to read how we've increased our consumption of this, I think it's Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz is a great book that tells about this. But essentially it was our fear of dietary fat from, animals and from, like saturated fat, all of those things. We became very fearful of those things. And we assumed that vegetable oils would be better. And I'm sure there's probably some conspiracy out there about, different industries that we're trying to support by doing this. But regardless, what this led to was a drastic increase in our consumption of these vegetable oils, kind of starting in the 70s. And when you look at the way that our health has just declined during this time, it's not solely because of vegetable oils, but I think that, one day we'll be able to look back and tease out that like vegetable oils played a very big role in our current health problem.
Yes, completely. Such a good book. I highly recommend The Big Fat Surprise.
It's great.
That
It'll
was
get you
so
fired up.
good. Yeah. I was gonna say it's delicious. Yeah, it's just so good. Okay, so let's kind of switch gears because we've been talking about all the bad news. Like we're all doomed for failure. Right. But the good news is, and we hinted at this a little bit before, is that we can heal our bodies and we can adjust things. And something that I've taken from our conversation so far is less carbs, winning. Mm-hmm. No vegetable oils when possible, great. Is there a role of movement as we improve our carb tolerance? Like, does movement have a role in any of this? Like moving our body in some way?
For sure. Yeah. And I think that like, you get a lot of people who there actually is research out there that you can lose weight, just through diet without moving your body and stuff like that. But I think that kind of goes against what we know is good for us. And movement is outside of, metabolic health and things like that. Like we'll get into that in a second, but just movement in general is great. It's a great way to just de-stress. It's a really good way to, depending how you do it, it's a good way to be social with other people, or it's a good way to get outside and get fresh air. There's just so many benefits that come from moving your body. But then when we get down to like a metabolic level, there's a lot that happens when we're training at a higher intensity. Whether let's say that you are doing high intensity interval training, or you're doing like, very highly aerobic exercise, you're producing changes at your cellular level that it improves your body's ability to metabolize things. So, if you're pushing it and you are, the fancy word would be mitochondrial biogenesis, which we won't get all, too technical with, but what's happening is you're putting stress on your body that's allowing it to make changes that improve your ability to metabolize nutrients. So, and this also happens when we're putting on muscle mass, or if we're decreasing our body fat percentage and increasing muscle mass, we're increasing our tissue that is able to, our metabolically healthy tissue, our tissue that can, better metabolize a lot of nutrients. So a lot of these changes happen when we are exercising and moving our body. I do think that a lot of like the things that the ancient Romans believed was that if you had your diet dialed in, the need to exercise your body was kind of something that they believed. But the reason why they believed that was because so they could dedicate their time to other things like studying philosophy, or, it's not a good idea to use that as an excuse to watch Netflix instead of going outside, right? Like you should, put it to good use. But, it is true. Like I found in myself since like, when I was in college, I played sports. And so I was very healthy. I never really had to, I had a big metabolism, but I also had a lot of energy expenditure. So it was very easy for me to keep weight off. When I stopped playing basketball and before I got into, keto, that changed. And I found that like, man, I had to be hitting it in the gym a lot to keep my, body composition where I wanted it to be, to keep my health markers where I wanted it to be. And then when I found keto, and then over the course of 5 years of just kind of dialing it in and like we talked about the individuality, finding what works best for me, I have found that my body does actually require I used to go into the gym and be in there for like an hour, and it would be like 6 days a week in the gym for an hour, hour and a half. And, now I'm finding that like, I actually require a lot less than that. And the exercise has become more enjoyable because it's like, I'm no longer in here like pounding myself to like burn calories. I'm more of in here like celebrating my body's ability to move and feel good. And knowing that that's going to help, contribute to the health improvements that I'm searching for with my diet. So I think diet and exercise should always go hand in hand. I think that in most cases, nutrition is the biggest lever that people can pull to improve their health. Because the truth is, gyms are not now because of COVID, but gyms are full. People are in there hitting the treadmill, they're in there working out, but they're still not seeing, improvements in their health. So I still think that nutrition is that big lever. But if you add the two together, you're going to see some robust improvements with nutrition and exercise.
Yes, completely. And for somebody like me that likes to just do life hard, I did the gym thing for decades and it was great. Well, it was great, competed in all the things, but now, I'm walking a lot, I'm doing a lot of activities. I'll park at the very end. My husband makes fun of me because like we park in the next parking lot over in the other complex. Like just to get steps in and just to move, or, carrying heavy things or moving furniture, or just doing life harder. And that's kind of how I personally stay fit, because you will not find me, at least not now, like in a gym doing things with weights. I just have zero interest. And I think a lot of people get really overwhelmed with the whole program thing. And so I just wanted to share that for women that are like, you will not see me at a CrossFit place.
Yeah. And
just move.
I think that like when it comes to exercise, because, the other question that you get in this, when you're talking about this thing's like, okay, what's the best type of exercise? And, or, if I want to lose the most fat, what's the best type of exercise I can do? The best type of exercise you can do is the one that you enjoy doing, is what I tell everybody. So it's like, it's not about, doing high intensity interval training for 10 rounds, or, to get in the gym and train for muscle growth, or, lift weight. Like, do what you like doing. If what you like doing is gardening and you're outside, like moving your body and picking up bags of dirt and moving things around, do that, or if it's going for walks, do that, if it's riding a bike, whatever. For me, it's basketball is my thing that I love. I did competitions back in the day too. I did like a physique competition when I first came out of college. I was on a treadmill every day for like 45 minutes and I hated it and just vowed that I would never do that again. And like now I go back to playing basketball and I stay in great shape doing something that I love. And I don't even know that I'm working out when I do it. So it's like, find the thing you love and make that be your exercise. And don't do whatever somebody said on Instagram you have to do to lose fat, because at the end of the day, if you hate what you're doing, does it even matter if it gets you to your health goal? Like if you're miserable in the process, like our well-being should be a part of our health as well, and not just, our body composition or what our health markers say. We should think about how we feel too.
Yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And so what do we want to see? Like we've chatted about how broken our bodies can become when it comes to our carb intolerance. But as we become more and more carb tolerant, like you and I said, oh yeah, man, I can slam a sweet potato or eat a white potato. And people are like, wait, what? How? Yeah. So can we chat a little bit about what that process is like and how to know that you're ready to start eating these sorts of things?
Yeah, for sure. So anybody who's coming to keto, like because for a specific reason. So if you're coming to a ketogenic diet because you have a lot of weight to lose, or whether because a doctor told you or you've decided to do it, or somebody who is, pre-diabetic, been diagnosed with that type of thing, then this conversation is probably not for you yet. I think for those people, you really need to focus on getting to the point of being carb tolerant, which is going to happen through more strict low carb approaches like a ketogenic diet and sustaining that for a period of time. You're going to see metabolic repair that's going to kind of help get you back to that. Now, when you know that you're able to do that, to do that, you're really going to probably have to do some testing, right? So I think that you're going to have to get to a point where you say, hey, I think that my metabolism has been restored enough that I can handle having carbohydrates back in my diet, which, that decision should be made factoring a lot of things in, right? Like we should also factor in our relationship with food. Like if you had previously a poor relationship with carbohydrates, and that you start having them again is going to mean that you're going to fall off the wagon and start binge eating again, then it doesn't matter what your carb tolerance level is. You should avoid the carbs. So there's definitely a know thyself when you're going through this. But besides that, I'd say, once you've gotten closer to your goal weight, once you feel like you've kind of restored some of your metabolic health, you can start working some carbohydrates back into your diet, and then testing your blood sugar along the way. So in terms of what would we be looking for? We would be looking for your blood sugar to return back to baseline quickly after having the carbs. So, it's important for people to know that like when we're having carbs and we're talking about that, like we are still being temporarily kicked out of ketosis in most cases. And that's okay for where we're probably at in our journey, right? Like we maybe aren't focused, and I don't want to speak for you, but for me at least, I'm not focusing on maintaining ketosis 100% of the time. I'm maintaining like cycling in and out of ketosis and being very easily able to, like, I want to be able to wake up in the morning and fast and get into ketosis if I need to. Like I want to maintain that ability. So, it's okay that you're being kicked out of ketosis when you fall into this category of like you're testing for carb tolerance now. So know that you're going to get kicked out, right? You're going to eat carbs. You're going to see an increase in your blood sugar. But what we care about is how quickly that gets back down to baseline. So, typically what I like to recommend is within like 90 minutes to 2 hours after you consume carbs, hopefully we're back down closer to baseline. So for people who are wanting to test, what you would do is you would test your blood sugar prior to eating, and then eat the carb food that you're going to have, and then test every 30 45 minutes afterwards until you're back down to baseline. If it's taking you over 2 hours to get your blood sugar back down to baseline, you're probably not there yet, or the carb source that you've chosen is not the right one. So that's part of the role, like we talked about. If I'm not going to have a cassava if it's going to cause my blood sugar to go to 160, like that's too high. But like a sweet potato, it might increase my blood sugar to like 120, but I'm going back down to like 85 within like 60 minutes. So I'm good with that because, that's just, we fear blood sugar, right? Like we have this thought that like we should never see an increase in it. Blood sugar is fine. Having an increase in it and then, having insulin actually put that into our cells, like that means we're using it. So, that can be a great thing. So we shouldn't have to fear that. But what we do want to fear is that staying elevated for too long, because that's when it can become a little bit more toxic to our health and cause, the insulin resistance and things we talked about this episode. So testing is really going to be like the primary way to do it. But like I said, I think that we really have to know where we're at in our journey. And if you're listening to this podcast or you're just getting ready to dive into keto, I don't think this conversation is for you yet. I think that like you're in a position where we need to get you carb tolerant, which is going to happen through, those more strict carbohydrate restriction methods.
Yes, I'm glad you prefaced all of that with a warning because it's so true. I've been doing keto for almost 7 years. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just crazy to think it's been 7 years. But,
Yeah.
our approach to keto after a year is going to be different than 4 years, which is going to be different than 10 years. And so I really wanted to ask you that because a lot of the listeners have been doing keto for quite some time, and it gets to that point where they're just terrified of carbohydrates. And they're, just like you said, their eyes are so focused on ketones. And though there is so many benefits to generating ketones, and for certain medical conditions, those ketones are required. But for us who are just doing it to help our metabolism, to balance ourselves out, I'm with you. I don't keep ketones are not king anymore. I always say that to my clients. Ketones are not king. Like it's nice to know. It's cool, when you're doing a deeper fast, when I'm at a certain point of my cycle and I'm fasting for maybe 48 plus hours, I'm going to be generating a lot of ketones. But yeah, I agree with you on that they're not king, at least not for me now. But they were at the beginning for sure.
Yeah. And, I think that like ketones are incredible molecules. So they're these signaling molecules, which means that they cause so many changes in our body. And there's even research coming out about like the genetic changes that can happen when we have them circulating. But one of the things that I think they're best for is like they do help restore our metabolism. So ketones themselves can act as repair molecules. So for people who have very damaged metabolism or damaged mitochondria is kind of more specifically what we're talking about, having elevated ketones more frequently is going to be more beneficial. And, it's not going to be a linear benefit, but like pretty darn near close to that. Like the more you have them available, I think when you're trying to restore your metabolism, the better. But then once you've gotten to that point, now you can start using them a little bit more strategically and for goal specific uses. So like for me, I like to use them whenever I'm getting into deep work. So I do a lot of writing. I like to write in the morning or, reading, research, whatever, early in the morning. So I will fast in the morning and take strategies to get myself into a deeper state of ketosis because I know I operate better when I do that. If I'm going, sometimes I take a trip away for a few weeks to go deep into a writing project. To do that, I'm going to be keto when I'm gone because I want to be in ketosis during that. But outside of that, I'm not necessarily focused on that. Like you said, the ketones aren't king anymore for me. What's king for me is like my ability to do what I want to do, right? Like how does my body perform? Can I exercise how I want to exercise? Can I, do I have a lot of hunger and cravings? How does my body feel? What are my health markers? Like those are the things that become more king for me, which it's really important because you're right. So we so often associate ketosis with health, right? It's like, oh, I'm in ketosis, so that means I'm healthy. But we were just talking about vegetable oils earlier, and it's like you can be in ketosis on a 60% vegetable oil diet, and I promise you're not going to be healthy if you're doing that. So we should know that being healthy is about a lot more than just being in ketosis for sure.
I'm so happy that you put those two together. Like you can be completely unhealthy. I mean, eating a ton of dairy, eating a lot of inflammatory foods, and also be in a state of ketosis. And I see that so often in my practice. And I like to, being this far along in my journey, just like you said, being able to use keto as a huge strategy. When I'm traveling or I need to be on stage and on point in front of cameras, you get like guaranteed you test my ketones then and they're going to be high because they need to be. Like I need to be on point. Yeah.
It's so cool to have that little tool in your back pocket.
Yes.
Though. It's almost like you have, because when you are more metabolically healthy, you can more easily transition, right? So like a short fast, like even an intermittent fast can put you into a state of ketosis. A couple days of being a little bit more strict with your carb restriction can put you in that deeper state. So when you have it's such a nice luxury to get to the point of good metabolic health. So you can sit there and be like, you know what? I got to speak in a week, but no problem. I'm going to kind of dial it in a couple days before. And I know that I'm going to be on point when I get on stage because I have this little extra tool, which is, metabolic flexibility in my back pocket.
Yes. And to come, and I don't know if this is your story too, but for myself to come from severely broken, like my body was severely broken, to be able to have that in my back pocket and to have that metabolic flexibility, I owe that all to a whole food-based ketogenic diet. Like completely 100% without a doubt.
Yeah. And I mean, big key word I think that you said there that is probably also worth talking about is the whole food approach too, right? Like I think and I made this mistake when I first started of eating just a ton of processed keto food, which it was harder when I first started. I've been on keto roughly since 2015. So, about 5 years. And it's easier to have more packaged foods now because there's so many out on the market. And, we talk about vegetable oils. If you're buying keto packaged foods, check the ingredient labels because so many of them are using soybean oil or canola oil or corn or maltodextrin or all these things that yeah, it's low carb, but it's not great for your health. But I was doing that at the beginning of keto. I was having packaged foods or I was making a lot of keto desserts and things like that. And I saw improvements, but that was just because of the diet that I was coming from. Like I was coming from a worse diet. So, this was better. But as I kept following the diet, I definitely found that I was like, man, I'm in ketosis, but I'm not experiencing that mental clarity that people are talking about. My energy isn't really what people are bragging up this diet to be great for your energy levels. I don't really feel that much better. What's going on? And then you start looking at it a little bit and you're like, well, all I'm doing is low carb. I haven't cut out, other processed ingredients. I haven't, added in more nutrient dense foods. And it happens all the time with new keto dieters. They're low carb, but they're also low nutrient and low calorie. And that can be a problem, right? Like if the great thing about keto is that you are removing things from your diet that are a problem, but you have to replace that with things that are great for you. You have to replace that with nutrient dense foods, and that comes from a whole food diet. So, that doesn't mean that you should never, like, I'm one of those people also that thinks humans are great innovators. We've created some great things, and, to enjoy the things that humans have created every once in a while, I think is great. But we need to be honest with ourselves and realize that the best diet is going to be the one where the bulk of our calories are coming from whole, real foods that our body actually recognizes, that are minimally processed, things like that. And when you do that, you're going to really see a lot of changes in your health. So again, anybody out there listening who you are doing keto and you're stuck at a plateau, like I get the plateau question I get all the time. It's like every day somebody's like, I'm stuck at a plateau. What do I do? And it's usually either vegetable oils or eat more real food, or a combination of the two.
Yes, I know. I launched a 6-week keto weight loss program in October, and it was my first weight loss program, like a big group call, coaching. And I was telling them to eat a whole bunch more. And we were cycling with their hormones and eating at different times and adding in flax and pumpkin and all these things that people are like, I don't know, man, like you're telling us to eat a lot of food. I'm like, no, actually do it.
Yeah.
And it was unreal. Like average weight loss was 15 pounds in 6 weeks by eating so much more. And I just was like, see, I told you. And it's so cool and empowering to see women who have been, like you said, restricting their food, restricting their macros, like just ultimate restriction, to be like, wait, I can eat all this and lose weight and feel good and have energy and like,
yes.
It's just so awesome.
It is. And, you bring up the difference in like genders, right? And it is very common with women, I think. And I think these questions that we're talking about, I do get most commonly from women. And it's created this like sense that keto or low carb isn't good for women. Like people think like, oh, it's not a great diet for women, or it's not sustainable. And there may be some truth to the sustainability. I think that like, there's probably some benefit to cycling out of it, or, bringing carbohydrates back into your diet in some form. But a lot of the complications that women are experiencing from doing a ketogenic diet are because they're way too low calorie / too low protein, and it's because of two things, right? Like one, keto does definitely blunt hunger. So you're going to have to deal with that a little bit. But two, we're just ingrained to think that our calorie intake is the most important factor. Especially like girls have been told since they were younger, to monitor their calorie intake and to not go overboard. So to switch that gear and being like, no, it's actually a lot less about that. And it's more about what you're putting in your body. It's a complete mind shift for a lot of these women. And, the other thing you see too is like, it's, hopefully this isn't singling a specific gender out, but I feel like women are a lot better cooks than men in most cases. So women are making like all these like, because my sister, she also did keto for a long time. She had endometriosis. She did keto, saw a ton of improvements from it. And she went to culinary school. So she knew how to make all these like delicious like treats and everything. But you talk to like so many women, it's like that's become like 90% of their diet is like keto treats. And it's like, that's great. You're low carb, but you're low nutrient when you're doing that. Like if most of your calories are coming from almond flour and cream cheese and stevia, like you're not getting a whole lot of nutrients that your body needs to thrive. So I think in a lot of cases when women are having some of the complications, like even the things like hair loss or hormonal issues, like the more serious things that are coming from this, I think a lot of that would be alleviated if there was just a little bit more focus on a whole food diet version of the keto diet. Like eat meat. Don't be afraid of red meat, especially. It's incredibly good for us. It's the most nutrient dense food on the planet. Eat plants too. I think we're omnivores. you don't need to go carnivore all the way. There's a place for it, but like vegetables are good too. And if you're getting the bulk of your calories from those things, you're going to be a lot healthier than you were before.
Chris, you're amazing. I'm like, yeah, preach. It's so true. Amen. Amen. That was wonderful. Where can people find more from you?
Yeah, so you can find more from me on social media. So I'm primarily on Instagram at the Ketologist. I also have a website that is theketologist.com. And then I have my own podcast and newsletter that are called the Thinking Health Podcast and the Thinking Health Newsletter, it's kind of this newer thing that I started recently where the newsletter it's less about like science and stuff, and it's more about like diet philosophy. It's more about like mindset and how we can be approaching health in general. So that's the newsletter. And then the podcast is just, everything. It's just all people from different walks of life, athletes, keto dieters, scientists, everything. So yeah, those are kind of the primary things. So that's Thinking Health and the Ketologist are the two ways.
Brilliant. I will include all those links in the show notes. Again, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your brilliance and dropping a bunch of truth bombs.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
I hope you really, really enjoyed today's video. It's always a blast to have Chris on the show, and I'm so glad we finally got to have a recorded conversation. If you want to catch up with previous podcast episodes, I've included a link up here where you can watch/listen to the Keto Diet Podcast here on YouTube. And if you have a podcast player, you can just look for the Keto Diet Podcast if you enjoy listening to podcasts on your phone and don't always want to catch up with video. And as always, if you have questions for me, concerns, comments, suggestions for the show, I will include a link down below where you can get in contact with me. And if you're at that phase in your carb up journey, your carb tolerance journey, you're finding you need a bit of carbs, don't forget that freebie. I've included a link down below on that with 50 plus carb up recipes on your ketogenic diet. So you can incorporate a little bit of carbs, but not going like too crazy hard at it. So again, I hope you enjoyed today's show, and I will see you back here next Sunday for another podcast episode. Bye.